Dunton Locks Pottery is located 2 miles south of Detroit Lakes, off Highway 59 by Dunton Locks Park. Open daily, 11 to 4.
For a closer look at Phil Holton's wood turning, call 346-3860.
The Glass Lady Studio is located in Lake Park, Minnesota at 403 Lake Street. If you'd like more information on classes or custom work, you can give us a call at 218-234-8844. Today we're at the Glass Lady Studio and we're going to talk about soldering a beginning pattern. Before me I have a tulip with a background of a circle behind it, and I have done most of the beginning step of soldering, of the first step of soldering I should say, which is tinning the one side. After a piece has been cut and ground and foiled, this tape that you're seeing around the edge, this copper tape, is one method of making a stained glass project. Of course, the other, and maybe more familiar, is doing the leaded windows like you would see in a church. But today, most people gravitate towards the copper foil because it allows you to do a little bit more intricate work, and sun catchers and things like that are easier to do out of copper foil. So tinning basically means you're doing the first step and holding all those pieces together. I have the pins surrounding it, holding it. After I would get that done, I would have the choice of flipping it, or I could go around the whole edge right now with my soldering iron and tin this whole outer edge too. Because of its shape, I won't be putting a frame around this. In the end, it actually will be hanging up just with two hangers in a window in some fashion, maybe like that. So right now, if I flip it over, you can see the other exposed edge. Soldering is one of the scariest steps for people, it seems, when they're making a beginning project, because of course you're dealing with hot lead. You're melting lead down into all these seams, and everybody's afraid of getting burned. But really, you have to kind of take a deep breath, relax, and things will go a lot smoother for you. This is a hot iron. If you hold it down on your glass in any one particular area too long, it could crack your piece. But you can't go the opposite extreme either, where you're so worried about cracking your piece that you're up here all the time with it, letting that solder just drop. Hot solder up here dropping down onto a colder glass piece could cause that to break as well. So you want to get your iron right down in there, and you're heating up that seam in that glass at the same time that you're melting the solder. You don't have to worry right now about getting it neat necessarily, because we're going to do a finish seam over the top of this later. Just going to go around, fill all those pieces in, all the seams in. I have my piece propped up for you so you can see a little bit better. I might not be able to do this for the next step, because it's a little bit awkward. And as you're doing the finish seam, which is kind of the puff seam that you're used to seeing, you'll have more solder on there and it could potentially run. Your glass pieces tend to get real dirty looking for a while when you solder. And that's okay, they'll shine all up later. The other thing that I see beginning students doing is, again, they're a little bit afraid of it and they want to brush stroke it, which might be a term that I've just made up, but it means they're just kind of doing this all the time. And that doesn't really work either. You have to get your iron down in there, heat up your seam, heat up your solder. One smooth movement. So I'll just show you a little bit of the edge, just so you can kind of see what I mean by that. You put your, this is flux, by the way. Sorry, I didn't mention that. It's just a liquid. It's kind of like an acid, actually. That's why I have the gloves on. The flux tends to really bother your hands, as does the soldering. If you get the little splatter on your hands, of course, you can get burnt. The flux is what makes the solder stick to the copper foil. So when you're soldering, you can solder, you can incorporate wire into your pieces, copper wire, copper pipe, like plumbing pipe is kind of fun to use sometimes for abstract pieces. Anything copper or tin, you can solder to. So then I've now tinned both sides of my piece, which a lot of the pieces that you see in stores oftentimes stop at this step because they're trying to save costs. That's not, your seam is not strong, and it will tend to give out a lot sooner if you don't do your finish solder. So for finish soldering, for tinning, I like to keep my iron flat and really follow that seam. For finish soldering, you want to tip your iron at an angle, and you're going to go along a little bit slower. And you can go back if you have sometimes you get a little air bubble in there, or yeah, you can see it's starting to run and pool right here. But so what I would do is just want to make sure that none of those pools are there and everything, that the seam size looks proportionate to the others. When you get to corners, that was my first one, so I carried it all the way through. But I don't want to start right in this corner again. You want to start out a little bit, because again, you'll get that pool of solder from all of those joints coming together. If in your first round of soldering you've gotten a little bit more on when you were tinning, you can let go, let up on the solder and then add in later as your seam gets a little bit lighter. Again, we're having troubles with it running there. So here's a good example. I've done this seam nut right here, or this where it connects. I've already gone through that, so I want to start up a little bit. And then you can choose to go down and connect them, but normally it wants to run together, so it'll find it. I think I'm going to have to lower this.
Okay, great.
So we're going to clean up this seam a little bit. I had removed the extra solder balls that were starting to form from having it angled. I'm going to pull some of this solder out of this connection right here. So you can really go back over it a lot of times. I think that's part of the fear, is that the thought is that I have a one-time shot at this and I can't go back and fix it if it's not perfect. You can continue to go back over it. However, if you are continuously going over the same seam, you are getting that hotter and hotter and hotter. So then you do run that risk of cracking it again, like we talked about. So sometimes if you're really having trouble with an area, if your glass pieces don't fit quite together and you have a little bit wider seam than you're anticipating, you might have to take a break from the leaf and move up here a little bit and then go back a little bit later. This is the part in the finished seaming when I was talking about brushing it. People tend to like to go like this, and it kind of makes your solder seam all bumpy. It doesn't flow together real well, and you're not going to accomplish that end goal. So you just tip your iron to the side, put your solder right down in there and melt it. This is a 60-40 solder that we're using. It also comes in a 50-50 solder, which if this was a real large window or if I had real wide seams, I might want to do that tinning step with the 50-50. It adds a little bit extra strength. Also, this piece is small enough, it's essentially just a large sun catcher, that we don't have to run any support wires through it or anything. But if it were a larger window, you would want to run wires through your seams from side to side and top to bottom. Stretch some copper wire, or there is a reinforcement bar that you can purchase to put through it. So after you've finished soldered this side, you would flip it back over and do the other. I'm going to do a little bit of the tinning on the edges here because I want to show you when you're doing a sun catcher, you have to tin you have to puff solder all of your edges, which makes quite a bit more work. You want to think always, oh, I'll do a small project that won't take much time. And sometimes those smaller projects take more time than the larger ones, because you wouldn't put a frame around this, or let's say a heart sun catcher. You would just puff solder. So to do that, real quick before we end here, you tip it up. I've tinned both sides of that. And all these little balls that have been falling, you can reuse them by picking them up on your iron. This is a little bit hot. And again, just going the up and down motion. So, if you're wanting to learn more about soldering or creating a stained glass window or mosaic, you can contact the Glass Lady Studio out in Lake Park. The Glass Lady Studio is located in Lake Park, Minnesota at 403 Lake Street. If you'd like more information on classes or custom work, you can give us a call at 218-234-8844.